is this summary chart. The first kingdom was Babylon. At this time there's a one world government created. The man of sin arises, beginning with Nebuchadnezzar and ending with Belshazzar, adequately describe the attitude of the man of sin to God. Now, the end of the first kingdom, the beginning of the second kingdom, God's people called out of Babylon. And the dominion of the first kingdom is taken away, but it's not destroyed. It's only destroyed at the end of the second kingdom, when there's an increase in knowledge, and the fourth kingdom is founded. And it was founded as a republic. At the time of Alexander the Great, when Greece became a world empire. At that time, the Roman Republic began to establish itself as a nation. Now, under Greece, the church was reorganized, it fell away. Then at the end of the Greek Empire, there's a change of government in the Fourth Kingdom. And what's that change of government? Well, Rome stopped being a republic and became an empire. It now did have a king, an emperor, and now it would be ruthless. Whereas before, as a republic, it was fairly moderate in its ways. It was almost lamb-like. Now, at the end of the Fourth Kingdom, we have a creation of the image of the beast, which was the creation of the papacy and the adoptions of the principles of the papacy by the Roman state under Constantine about 320 AD, but it wasn't the papacy ruling, it was still the Roman state. The papacy itself wouldn't obtain power till 538. And we know that Jerusalem was destroyed by Rome also towards the end of that era. So what we've seen here is that history repeats. But it doesn't just repeat once. Now, the Bible makes this very, very clear. In Ecclesiastes 3:15, that which has been is now, and that which is to be has already been. And God requireth that which is past. It's not just that it happens by accident. God requires it to happen. And so that which has been already 2 times will be again. Now, we say, oh, but there's no more empires. True, there's no empires, but there's what we call hegemonies, which is an empire, but it's not under one king. A hegemony is a collaboration of nations led by one nation. We speak of the United States hegemony, and so effectively it is an empire, but it's not established militarily, but through diplomacy and control of the economy. So let's have a look at how that which is to be has already been. We say, well, what kingdom arose after ancient Rome? And most people have been taught to say, oh, no kingdom arose because Rome was the last kingdom. Well, actually that's not true. A new kingdom arose called the Holy Roman Empire, and this kingdom ruled for about 1,000 years. And we read about this kingdom in Daniel. This is the kingdom of the man of sin. Now, the Holy Roman Empire actually subdued the world militarily. Kings such as Clovis, king of the Franks, and Charlemagne militarily submitted the nations around them to the papacy. And if they wouldn't submit, well, they were exterminated. They created a completely new world order that had never before existed, because this new world order wasn't a civil ruler ruling over the nations, but this was a religious ruler ruling over the nations. This was a new world order like there had never been. Again, there was a common tongue, and this tongue was Latin, and it was spoken throughout the entire Holy Roman Empire. There was the worship of the mother and child, only this time we didn't call it Ishtar and Tammuz, it was called Mary and Jesus, or Madonna and Child. Again, we have sun and moon worship in Sunday sacredness and in the celebration of Easter or Ishtar. This empire was going to persecute for 1,260 years. You might say, well, Holy Roman Empire didn't rule for 1,260 years, but while it was declared formally to be an empire under Charlemagne, it had actually begun hundreds of years before under Clovis, king of the Franks, who first submitted his kingdom to the papacy, and it didn't really take in all of Europe until the time of Charlemagne. About the time of the Reformation, or just before in the 1400s, the Turks invaded from the east, as the Medes and Persians had done, and they attacked and destroyed Constantinople and set up the Ottoman Empire. Now, while they didn't completely overthrow Europe, what they did was that they made all of the scholars flee from Constantinople into Western Europe, taking with them all the manuscripts of the Bible. And so Bibles came from the east. Between the Bibles and the Ottomans, the two of them broke the power of Rome in 1555. Because, on one hand, the Bible led to the creation of the Protestant Reformation, which would have been quickly crushed by the armies of Rome if it hadn't been for the fact that the armies of Rome were busy trying to fight off the Ottoman Turks. And so the two of these powers combined to break the power of Rome in 1555, when a treaty was struck called the Peace of Augsburg. And what this treaty did, it said that the Protestant states were freed from being subject to the Pope. And so the Pope no longer now had complete control over Europe, and Protestants were able to flee into the Protestant states to protect themselves. This period of the time of the Reformation is called by secular historians the period of early modern Europe. During this period, the Roman Catholic culture was preserved, as was the Church, and the Protestant churches, like the Lutheran Church, preserved much of Roman Catholicism, and definitely its culture. And likewise with a lot of the other national churches in the Protestant countries. They preserved the basic structure of Catholicism within them. They didn't accept the Pope, but they kept its culture and teachings. And Rome itself wasn't destroyed. It just transformed itself into a centre of learning through the help of the Jesuits and became, the leading educational centre in Europe, whereas before it had been the centre of ignorance. And at this time, just like during the period of Abraham and during the period of the Medes and the Persians, Protestants were called out of Rome. They were called across the sea west to the New World, just like Abraham had been called across the river west to Canaan, and how the captive Jews had been called west out of Babylon, again across the river to the Promised Land. That was the period of the Second Kingdom. It wasn't really a single kingdom, because during this third repetition, they're not empires, as we've said. And so after this period of the Second Kingdom arises the period of the Third Kingdom, which we call secular modern Europe. And this arose at the time of Napoleon. Now in 1798, the French Revolution came to an end. And Napoleon came to power. And he came from the west. And he overthrew all of the states of Europe. Now, in fact, Napoleon saw himself as repeating the history of Alexander the Great. In fact, he asked the Directory, which was the French government, for an army so that he could go into Egypt and Syria and fight the same battles and conquer the same lands that Alexander had conquered. And they actually gave him this army, and yes, he went and did those things. But in addition to that, he destroyed, or his general Berthier attacked Rome, shut down the Vatican, and destroyed the papacy. Again, this is in the Third Kingdom, just as it happened the two previous times in history. At this time, we have the rise of the Industrial Revolution, which is an explosion of science and learning. And Daniel, telling us about this time, says that many shall run to and through, and knowledge shall be increased. And that's exactly what happened. This Third Kingdom, the start of the Third Kingdom, coincides with the last days. Now, what Napoleon did is that he spread throughout Europe, and throughout the world in fact, the revolutionary ideas of France. Now, these revolutionary ideas had come from a period known as the French Enlightenment, about 20 to 30 years before the French Revolution itself. And what this French Enlightenment was, is that the philosophers had begun to study the pagan philosophies of Greece. And in the pagan philosophies of Greece, they discovered such concepts such as democracy, atheism. In fact, evolution was taught by the Epicureans, which is one of the ancient Greek schools of philosophy. So we have this mixture of secular culture and pagan gods. As we know, the French Revolution, they worshipped the goddess of reason in this time, in this period of secular modern Europe, just like it happened, just as we find in Egypt and ancient Greece. During the time of the Third Kingdom, Europe split into two competing factions, as the Triple Entente and the Central Powers. Just like the King of the North and the King of the South in Egypt, and just like in Greece, and just like Upper and Lower Egypt. Now, during this time of the Third Kingdom, as has always happened, we have some changes in God's church. First of all, there's a reorganization. The Christian church's church. And it begins to become prosperous. In the middle of the 1900s, the church prospered materially. And towards the end of the 20th century, the church begins to fall away from faithfulness and become like the churches around her, as in all the previous fulfillments. Now, what happens at the end of the Third Kingdom? Well, we read in Revelation that there's a fourth kingdom, and this kingdom is a dragon in sheep's clothing. We know it's a dragon because it speaks like a dragon, and the Bible says that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh, in Matthew 12:34. And so this beast with two lamb-like horns in Revelation is actually a dragon. And we remember that a dragon in Revelation chapter 12 represents imperial Rome, the fourth kingdom. Again, this kingdom is diverse from others. How is it diverse? Well, it's a republic. At a time when all the other kingdoms, apart from France, which was in revolution, were monarchies, this fourth kingdom was arising as a republic. And it has lamb-like horns, and is initially a defender of Protestantism, just like Rome had been a defender of Judaism, and Assyria had been a defender of Israel. But we know that this beast with the lamb-like horns will put to death all who do not receive the mark of the beast and worship his image. So again, it repeats exactly the same history. It will transform itself into an image of the beast, and if history is to repeat, it will also relocate its capital in doing so. Let's now look at the summary chart. First,